Rory, let me ask you first about the situation in the Ukraine. I mean, you are steeped in foreign affairs. You're an experienced diplomat yourself. What is your hunch, your feeling about the state of play there?
My hunch is that Putin is trying to destabilize and he will muck around. Remember that Russia is not really run by generals, it's run by intelligence people. Putin himself comes from a KGB background, and they are very, very committed to the idea of what they call hybrid warfare, which means that you can expect that he could withdraw troops from the border, but that wouldn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't then be a cyber attack following up or some other troop movement following. And remember, he's invested a lot of faith. I think that's the other final thing I'd say. A lot of his reputation is now connected to this. He's led his troops up to the top of the hill, and it's going to be difficult for him to come down again without getting something. And that's really where we're trapped, because we shouldn't be giving him something. We
Yes,
shouldn't be rewarding his blackmail.
no, and we're getting reports as I speak of a cyber attack on Ukraine. Now, look, you have now called, haven't you, for a coordinated international plan to help refugees. Now, you could argue that this is a matter of simple humanity. I'm sure you would do that, but it's still challenging, I suppose, for national leaders in lots of ways.
It is. And I'm really calling for it to begin with in relation to Afghanistan, partly because we have very particular obligations to Afghanistan. The US and its allies, leaving in August, handed the country over to the Taliban. Many people in the country, famously people like Afghan female judges, are at real risk of persecution. And of course, now there is mass starvation in that country. We have an opportunity for countries like the United States and Britain and European countries to work with NGOs on the ground to identify the very most vulnerable people and resettle them in our own countries. That's not about returning to the kind of scenes that people saw in the Mediterranean in 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that we are really identifying responsibly people who are at genuine risk and then providing refuge for them in our countries.
Right. It's the Afghanistan crisis that prompted you to think in this way. But I suppose if the crisis in Ukraine develops, then that could add to the sort of pressures we're discussing. What would it mean for numbers? What would it mean for numbers for the UK, Rory?
I'm proposing that we sign up, countries sign up to take annually 0.05% of their population in refugees every year. So for a country like Britain, that would be about 30,000 people. A country like the United States, it's roughly what Biden has already committed to. The United States takes about 165,000 a year. And countries like Canada and Sweden are well above those kinds of numbers. So I've pitched at a number which I think is realistic, that matches what countries like the US are doing, is below what Canada's doing, but would be a stretch upward for Britain, which is committed to take 20,000 Afghan refugees, but so
Yes.
far hasn't really done anything at all.
Yes. I mean, you don't need me to tell you, Rory, that the British government has made migration control one of its defining missions. So you would expect pushback, I suppose, on this suggestion.
Well, I suppose you'd call them out and you'd say, look, again and again, the British government keeps saying that they're not against taking genuinely vulnerable people. What they don't want to do is encourage economic migration. So this is a proposal where they genuinely could work with human rights organizations to find human rights defenders, women, judges in Afghanistan who are at genuine risk, target them and bring them over rather than going for open borders, which of course is what the Conservative government is trying to control. And it is exactly what, in fact, Australia, a lot of these politicians talk about a lot about Australia. That's in fact what Australia does, which is to do this form of what they call responsible resettlement.
Yes. I mean, I know you frame this as an argument with moral purpose behind it, and you've got some weighty support. The Conservative chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tom Tugendhat, he's backing this idea, and so is Tobias Ellwood, the chair of the Defence Committee. But when it comes to moral purpose, do you believe that the UK has in some way lost that sense?
I think it has. And I think it's not just the UK. I think there's been a terrible period over the last 20 years where the whole of the West, the US and its allies, has lost its moral purpose and legitimacy. And this is for a whole series of reasons, including the mess and humiliation of Iraq and Afghanistan, the rise of China, populism, isolationism. Whatever it is, we are now in a situation where anywhere you go in the world, sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, the reputation of the Old West is not what it once was. And I think being generous about refugees, stepping forward and saying we are going every year to take a controlled number of some of the most vulnerable people in the world is a way of restoring our moral purpose and moral legitimacy,
Yes.
a way of showing the world that the United States, Britain, Europe, Canada have not given up on the idea that they can act morally internationally.
Yes. I mean, do you have any allies in government, some of your former colleagues? Do you have any support from them? They wouldn't say it, I suppose, openly, because that's not how collective government is run. But do you have supporters in government among your former colleagues?
No, the support that I've got, I've just, for example, just as we're talking, just got a text from Andrew Mitchell, the former Chief Whip and Secretary of State for International Development, saying that he would support. I think he's suggestive of the fact that there is a very strong number of Conservative MPs who do feel that we have moral obligations and that you don't have to choose between either open borders on the one hand or taking nobody at all. That the lesson really of Nazi Germany and the refusal of the Swiss to take in Jews fleeing Nazi Germany during the Second World War is that countries do have a moral obligation to take people at risk of persecution. And Britain is a country that prided itself on behaving honorably. And I think we need to recover some of that. And I'm sure that Conservative colleagues will come along with that. And I think they just need to be nudged in the right direction. In fact, I'd like to encourage Boris Johnson to take the lead on this. It would be an unexpected thing to do, but it would be a way of teaming up with President Biden and showing that Britain and the United States together can show a moral example internationally. In fact, it could be a way of showing that Brexit isn't just about turning inward, an opportunity to show Britain reaching out positively.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether your idea gains traction in government as well as on the Conservative side of the House of Commons. Just lastly on home politics, I mean, you made no secret of the fact that you are critical of Boris Johnson in a very thorough and open way. Do you believe, Rory, that a reset, as it's been called, is that a possibility?
No, I think Boris Johnson cannot run in the next election. It's inconceivable that from the position he's in, he's going to be able to come back and lead the Conservative Party in the next election. And the longer that the Conservative Party holds on to him, the more pain they're signing up for. People need to be strategic. If I'm right that he can't possibly lead them in 3 years' time, they need to now find a new leader. And that's a brutal thing to do, but the time has come. And the longer they hold on to Boris Johnson, the more the Conservative Party will be damaged and discredited.
So is that a preference or is it a prediction? Do you believe then that your old colleagues, Conservative MPs, will commit political regicide?
Yes, eventually they will. The Conservative Party is actually quite ruthless. I mean, remember, of the last 5 Conservative prime ministers, all except one of them were toppled in these kinds of leadership challenges after elections. And one of the reasons why the Conservative Party is the longest standing, most successful party, Democratic Party in the world, is because it is capable of being ruthless. And they have a prime minister at the moment who is being investigated by the Metropolitan Police, who led this extremely unwise attempt over lobbying an Owen Paterson to try to challenge a parliamentary committee, and who everybody in the country knows is not a man for detail, is not a man for serious government, and it's time that the Conservative Party grasp the nettle. The reason they backed him is that he was popular. He is no longer popular, and they need to find someone else.